Welcome to Sci-Fi Alien. Imagine this. A battle-worn soldier, Erik, is given a chained alien woman as a war prize, only to discover she is far more than just a trophy. As they fight side by side, their bond deepens. But can they escape their pasts, or will it consume them? Stay tuned to find out. Captain Erik Hawk stood amidst the wreckage of a war-torn planet, the air thick with the smell of burnt metal and the faint echoes of past battles. The Graian Dominion, once a powerful enemy that had ravaged countless worlds, was finally defeated. The victory was hard-won, and the price was high. As the smoke of the battlefield swirled around him, Erik knew that there was no real triumph in war, only the hollow recognition of survival. The Graian Dominion had been brought to its knees, its warlords surrendering one by one, but with every surrender, a new, darker reality unfolded. As a hero of the war, Erik had earned a reward, but this reward, a symbol of conquest, felt foreign to him. He was given something he had not asked for, something he hadn't even considered, a prisoner. The alien woman, kneeling before him, was shackled in chains, her blue skin marked by the unmistakable scars of captivity. Her once strong posture now slumped, her eyes vacant as if she had seen the worst of what the universe had to offer. Her collar pulsed with an eerie blue light, and the faint hum of control technology seemed to seep into the very air around him. Erik couldn't help but feel a twinge of discomfort as he looked down at her. To most, she was simply a trophy, a symbol of victory, a thing to be admired and owned. But to Erik, she was a reminder of everything he had fought against, the subjugation, the cruelty, the abuse of power. She was a victim of the war, not its conqueror, and yet, here she was, thrown before him as a prize. The Graian general, Reos, stood behind her, his towering form casting a long shadow over both Erik and the woman. He had the look of a man accustomed to victory. His reptilian eyes were cold, calculating, yet strangely devoid of the arrogance that had once marked his every action. His deep voice echoed through the silent air. "This is your reward, human. Take her. She is the last of her kind, locked away in our dungeons. Now, she belongs to you." Erik's gaze shifted to the woman. She did not look at him, her eyes fixed on the ground, as if she had given up on hope long ago. There was no anger in her posture, no defiance, only resignation. The chains, though they were no longer physically holding her in place, seemed to have a far deeper grip on her than any metal restraint could ever have. "You misunderstand," Erik said quietly, his voice cutting through the thick silence. His words were firm, but they lacked the conviction of a man who knew what he was supposed to do next. "I didn't fight this war for this." His eyes met Reos' cold stare, but he didn't look back down at the woman. Rio sneered, his crimson eyes narrowing. "You fought to end our rule, to claim victory. And here, you stand victorious. This is one of your spoils." He jerked his clawed hand toward the woman. "Take her, or end her suffering. It makes no difference to me." Erik's jaw tightened. He had seen enough suffering in his lifetime to last him 1,000 lifetimes. He had seen the lives shattered by war, the families torn apart, the countless souls lost in the wake of meaningless violence. But standing before him now was a woman who had suffered long enough. He could feel the weight of her despair in the air, pressing down on him. "No," Erik said, his voice unwavering. "This isn't right." He knelt down, his knee meeting the dirt beside her. She flinched at the sound of his movement but did not raise her head. The collar around her neck glowed faintly, a quiet reminder of the power that kept her bound. He reached out, his fingers brushing lightly against the collar. She stiffened at his touch, but he wasn't deterred. He had seen these colors before, technology designed to break a person, to strip them of their will, their dignity, their humanity. Without a word, Erik found the release mechanism, a small, almost invisible switch hidden beneath the collar. He twisted it, feeling the metal shift and give way. The collar sparked briefly, its blue glow flickering before it fell to the ground with a quiet clink. The woman's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, Erik thought she might speak, might offer some sign of life beyond the silence that had held her captive for so long. But she didn't. She simply exhaled, the faintest sigh escaping her lips, and for the first time, Erik saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a fleeting glimmer of what could be freedom, or maybe just a brief moment of relief. Reos watched from behind him, his gaze unwavering, but Erik felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. For the first time, he wasn't just a soldier. He wasn't a hero receiving his spoils. He was a man standing in front of another human being, offering her the one thing he could, freedom. "Come with me," Erik said, his voice gentle, but firm. He extended a hand to her, but she did not move. Not at first. She remained kneeling, her shoulders tense, her body trembling as if unsure whether she could trust this man who had just freed her, or whether she should remain in the safety of her silence. After a long, quiet moment, she rose. Slowly, uncertainly, but she rose. Erik stepped back, allowing her the space to decide, but his eyes never left her. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. She didn't even meet his gaze. She simply followed him as he led the way toward the ship that had once been a vessel of war, now a vessel of something else, something more uncertain, more fragile, but undeniably more human. As they walked, Reo's voice followed them, distant and indifferent. "Strange creatures, you humans." Erik ignored the comment. His mind was focused on the woman walking beside him, still carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken stories. He didn't know who she was, where she had come from, or what had happened to her, but he knew one thing: he had made a choice. A choice to give her a chance at something different, something that was hers to decide, not to be dictated by the chains that had bound her for so long. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if she would ever trust him, if she would ever speak, if she would ever feel safe. But for the first time in a long while, Erik felt the weight of his decision lift just a little. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a trophy of war. Maybe it was the beginning of something more. A long journey, not just of survival, but of healing. A journey that neither of them could yet understand, but one that would change them both forever. As the cold, sterile air of the ship filled the space between them, Erik couldn't shake the feeling that, while Selena's chains had fallen, something far more complex was still holding her captive. The collar that once controlled her had clattered to the ground, discarded and useless, but the invisible shackles of her past seemed far more permanent. She walked beside him in silence, her eyes never meeting his, her expression still one of quiet resignation. There was no joy in her newfound freedom, no relief. There was only the weight of a history too painful to revisit and a future uncertain, as foreign to her as the stars outside the ship's windows. Erik had thought that freeing her would be the hardest part, but he soon realized that true freedom was never simple. It was a long, painful process, one that demanded more than just physical release. It required the rebuilding of a soul. As he led Selena to her quarters, he couldn't help but wonder if she would ever truly be free, if she could ever leave behind the scars that war and captivity had etched so deeply into her being. Selena had been given a new lease on life, but was it truly freedom? She had been liberated from the Graian's control, yes, but the emotional and psychological chains she carried were not so easily undone. It was a burden Erik knew all too well, the aftermath of war and the toll it took on those who fought, those who survived. The difference, of course, was that he had been given the choice to fight, to walk away, to move forward with his life. Selena, on the other hand, had never been given a choice. Her life had been dictated by the whims of her captors. She had lived for too long under the shadow of violence and domination, and now that she was free, she didn't know how to exist without those chains. In her quiet moments, Erik would catch glimpses of her vulnerability. It wasn't just the way she walked with a slight limp, or how she flinched when loud noises erupted nearby. It was in the small things, the way she would avoid looking at herself in the mirror, the way she held herself at a distance from him. She was afraid of freedom, as if it were another cage in disguise, something she wasn't equipped to handle. It was a look that reminded him of the men and women he had seen after the war, soldiers who came home to find themselves strangers in their own world, lost in a life that no longer made sense. One night, Erik found her standing by the window, staring out at the vast expanse of space. He hadn't heard her come in. She was always so quiet, so composed, but there was a deep sadness that lingered in her stillness. Her blue skin seemed to glow faintly in the dim light of the room, and for a moment, Erik just watched her, wondering how to reach her. "Selena," he said softly, taking a step closer. "What do you see when you look out there?" She didn't turn to face him. Instead, she kept her eyes fixed on the stars, her voice barely a whisper. "I see nothing. Just empty space." Erik frowned, stepping closer. "That's not true. There's more out there than just emptiness. There's opportunity. There's a whole universe waiting for us." Selena's laugh was hollow, bitter. "Opportunity? What is that? A chance to be trapped again? A chance to be caught in another cage, another war?" Her words hit Erik harder than he expected. He had known the weight of the battle, the heavy responsibility of war, but he had never felt the way she did. For him, the freedom to explore, to fight, to choose, had always been a gift. But for Selena, freedom was a concept as alien to her as the stars outside. She had been a prisoner for so long that the idea of truly living without fear seemed almost impossible. "Selena, you're not trapped here," Erik said, his voice firm but gentle. "You're free now. You have the power to choose what you do with your life." She shook her head, a flicker of something deeper passing through her eyes. "You don't understand," she said, her voice low. "I was never allowed to choose. I don't even know who I am without them telling me who I should be. I've been owned for so long, I don't know what it feels like to own myself." The raw honesty in her words stunned Erik into silence. He had freed her physically, but he had never considered the emotional prison she had lived in. The mental chains that were more enduring than any collar, more suffocating than any cage. The idea of being free, of being her own person, was a concept she could not yet grasp, not after so many years of being controlled. "You're not owned anymore," Erik said, his tone softer now, more understanding. "You're not anyone's property. You can choose. You're free to be whoever you want to be." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she continued staring out the window, her expression unreadable. Erik waited, his thoughts racing. He had always believed that freedom was a simple matter, just break the chains and you were free. But now he saw the truth. Freedom was far more complex, and it wasn't something that could be given or taken. It had to be earned, learned, and most of all, it had to be believed. Days passed, and Selina's struggles with her freedom continued. She would spend hours in silence, her mind locked in places Erik couldn't follow. Sometimes, she would speak of her past, of the times she had been forced to do things, unspeakable things, by the Graian. And every time she spoke of those moments, Erik saw how deeply those experiences had cut her. They were scars, invisible yet sharp, etched into her very soul. One evening, as the ship drifted through an uncharted system, Erik found Selina in the engine room, her fingers running over the ship's controls with an odd mix of curiosity and caution. She was silent, but her movements were deliberate, as if she was trying to reclaim some sense of control over her life, something she could shape for herself. "Are you fixing the engine?" Erik asked, standing in the doorway. She didn't look up, but her voice was steady. "I'm trying. It's something to do. Something I can control." Erik stepped inside, leaning against the wall. "I didn't know you knew how to work with machines." Selina hesitated before speaking, as though the idea was foreign to her. "I used to work on ships. Not like this, but enough to know what's what." Erik raised an eyebrow. "And why didn't you tell me?" She gave a small shrug. "I didn't think it mattered. But it does now, doesn't it? I need something to do. Something to prove that I'm more than just this. More than just a prisoner." Erik asked softly. "More than just the past," Selina corrected, finally meeting his gaze. Her eyes were still filled with that same deep sadness, but now there was something else, something fragile, but there. "I don't want to be that anymore. I want to be something different." Erik nodded, understanding more in that moment than he had in days. Freedom was not just about escaping chains. It was about finding meaning again, about rediscovering who you were when all you had ever known was being controlled. It was about giving yourself the permission to choose. "I think you're already more than that," Erik said quietly. "And I think you'll find what you're looking for. You just need to believe you can." Selina didn't respond right away, but when she spoke, her voice was softer. "Maybe." She turned back to the engine, her fingers running along the control panel with newfound purpose. For the first time since they had met, Erik saw the beginning of something more in her eyes, hope, perhaps, or at least the possibility of it. And maybe that was all either of them could hope for. A future where freedom wasn't just a gift given, but something that both had to choose, each and every day. As the days passed aboard the ship, Erik began to realize that the road to freedom was far more complicated than he had imagined. Selina, though physically liberated from the chains of her Graian captors, remained emotionally tethered to her past. Each day was a struggle for her to reclaim her humanity, her sense of self that had been stripped away for so long. And as Erik watched her, he understood that while the collar may have been removed, the true battle for her freedom had only just begun. The first signs of change were subtle. Selina would sit quietly for hours, her eyes distant, as if lost in memories that she couldn't escape. Sometimes, she would speak to him, but the conversations were brief, fragmented. She never spoke about the pain she had endured under the Graian dominion, never explained the scars, both physical and mental, that marred her soul. Erik knew better than to push. He had seen too many soldiers return from war, scarred in ways that couldn't be healed by a simple act of kindness or a few words of reassurance. But it wasn't just the words they didn't share that spoke volumes, it was the silence between them. In those moments, Erik could feel the weight of what she was carrying, something too heavy to put into words, too complex to explain. He wanted to help, but he wasn't sure how to. He was a soldier, trained to fight and protect, but how could he protect someone from the ghosts of their past? How could he fight the unseen wounds that had been inflicted on her over so many years of captivity? One evening, after another long day of silence between them, Erik found Selena standing near the ship's observation window, gazing out at the vast expanse of space. Her blue skin glowed faintly in the low light, and for a brief moment, Erik saw her as more than just a survivor of war. He saw her as a woman, strong, but fragile, broken, but capable of being healed. Still watching the stars, Erik asked softly, approaching her from behind. Selena didn't turn to face him. She never did at first. She simply nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "They're all I have left. They remind me that there's more out there. But sometimes, I wonder if there's even a place for me anymore." Erik stepped closer, hesitant, but determined. "You belong here, Selena. You're free now. The stars might be out of reach, but you've got a future now. You can decide what comes next." She shook her head, her gaze still fixed on the stars. "You don't understand. I've been told what to do, who to be, for so long. Freedom. It's terrifying. I don't know what to do with it." Erik watched her for a moment, feeling the heavy silence pressing in between them. "I get that," he said finally, his voice rough. "After the war, I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't know what to do with my life. I thought I was just a soldier, that my purpose was only in battle. But then, I started to realize that freedom doesn't just come from escaping. It comes from choosing. From deciding who you are, not who anyone else says you should be." Selena turned her head slightly, her eyes still distant, but there was a flicker of curiosity in them. "And what did you decide?" "I decided I had to live. I decided to be more than just a man who fought wars. I had to find something worth fighting for, something that wasn't about destruction." His voice softened, but it held the weight of his experiences. "Maybe you don't know who you are yet, but you don't have to figure it out all at once. You just have to give yourself the chance to be more than what they made you." For a moment, Selena didn't respond. She simply stood there, her hand resting against the cool glass of the window, as if grounding herself. Erik watched her, the silence between them no longer uncomfortable but filled with an unspoken understanding. She was starting to let him in, even if just a little. Days turned into weeks, and though Selena still struggled with her emotions, Erik began to notice the small signs of change. She would talk to him more often, not just about the past but about her thoughts, her fears, her uncertainties. She still avoided talking about the worst parts of her life, but there were moments, brief, fleeting moments, when she allowed herself to be vulnerable with him. One night, after a particularly long stretch of silence, Erik found Selena in the galley, standing by the counter as she absent-mindedly stirred a bowl of food. She looked up when he entered, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she smiled, a small, tentative smile, but one that was genuine. "Couldn't sleep?" Erik asked, leaning against the doorframe. Selena shook her head, then paused. "I don't know if I'll ever get used to this. The quiet. The peace." She turned her eyes toward the stars outside the ship, her expression softening. "I never thought I'd get to see something like this. I never thought I'd be free to feel anything." Erik nodded, understanding the depth of her words. "It takes time. You've spent years locked away from everything. But you're not alone anymore, Selena. And you don't have to carry it all by yourself." She glanced at him, her silver eyes searching his face, and for a moment, Erik wondered if she would open up. But instead, she simply nodded, turning back to the window. "I don't know how to let go," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "You don't have to let go all at once," Erik said, his voice steady. "Healing doesn't work like that. You don't have to forget what happened. You don't even have to forgive all at once. But you have to give yourself permission to heal. To start living for yourself, not for anyone else's expectations." For the first time, there was a long pause, a heavy silence where Selena didn't try to hide from him, didn't pull away. She didn't speak for a while, but Erik saw it in her eyes, the acknowledgement that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about moving forward, little by little, and finding a way to live again. The days that followed were still hard for Selena, but she began to share more, bit by bit. Sometimes it was about something small, like the strange foods she had been forced to eat while imprisoned, or the dreams she had about her past. But other times, it was more deep, raw admissions about how she had been broken by the Graian, how she had been taught to see herself as less than human. In these moments, Erik listened. He didn't try to fix things or rush her through her pain. He let her speak at her own pace, allowing her to take the time she needed to process. And, slowly, she began to see herself differently, not as a tool, not as a prisoner, but as someone who could choose, someone who could heal. "I think," Selena said one evening, sitting across from Erik at the table, "I think I'm starting to believe you. That I can choose what comes next. Maybe I don't know exactly who I am yet, but I don't think I have to know all at once." Erik smiled, a feeling of relief washing over him. "You're not alone in this," he said, his voice full of quiet conviction. "You never were." And in that moment, Selena smiled back, a real smile, one that reached her eyes for the first time since she had boarded the ship. They didn't need to say anything more. Their bond was stronger than words could capture. It was a bond built on understanding, on patience, and on the quiet strength they shared as they each found their way to healing, step by step. As days turned into weeks aboard the ship, the distance between Erik and Selena seemed to slowly diminish, yet there was still an unspoken weight that hung between them. The healing process, while well underway, was far from complete. Erik had seen the cracks in Selena's walls, those fragile moments when she allowed herself to feel something beyond the rawness of her past. But he knew that trust wasn't something that could be demanded. It had to be earned, step by step, and he wasn't about to rush it. Their conversations had deepened, moving beyond the surface-level exchanges of the first few weeks. They had begun sharing stories of their pasts, albeit cautiously, learning to trust one another with pieces of their broken selves. But there was still something more, an unspoken connection that they both felt but hadn't fully explored yet. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something that felt like it could grow into that. One afternoon, as they sat together in the ship's galley, a new tension seemed to settle between them. Erik had noticed it the night before when they had worked side by side to repair a malfunction in the ship's engine. It was subtle, just the way they moved around each other, the quiet synchronization that had formed between them. There was an understanding now, an unspoken rhythm they shared. Their partnership wasn't born out of necessity or survival anymore. It was something more complex, something that was beginning to feel real. "Why did you stay?" Selena asked suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Her eyes weren't on him but on the small repair kit laid out in front of them. Erik blinked, caught off guard by the question. He had spent so many nights thinking about why he had saved her, why he had chosen to bring her aboard his ship, to risk everything. But no one had ever asked him that directly. "I guess I stayed because it didn't feel right to leave you," he said, his voice low, as if the truth had been buried for too long and finally found its way to the surface. "I could have handed you over to someone else. I could have left you behind. But I didn't. Because I saw someone who didn't deserve to be discarded. Someone who deserved the chance to decide what happens next." Selena's eyes flickered up to meet his, and for a brief moment, the walls between them seemed to shift. Her gaze softened, not with pity, but with understanding. "I didn't ask for your help," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. "I never asked for anyone to fight my battles. I've always had to fight alone." "I know," Erik replied, his voice firm but gentle. "But that's the thing, Selena. You don't have to fight alone anymore." She turned her eyes back to the repair kit, but something in the way she held herself had changed. Her posture was no longer rigid, no longer defensive. There was a quiet acceptance in the way she moved, as if she were beginning to see the possibility of belonging again. That night, after the day's work was done, they found themselves alone on the ship's observation deck, the vast expanse of space spread out before them. Erik had always found solace in the quiet of the stars, the weight of the universe somehow comforting in its silence. But tonight, it felt different. There was a new layer to the silence, one that was filled with the weight of everything that had been left unspoken between them. "Do you ever think about the future?" Selena asked, her voice breaking the stillness. Erik looked over at her, his expression soft. "I try not to," he admitted. "I've spent so much of my life thinking about what's coming next that I forgot to live in the moment. But with you here, it's like I can finally breathe. I don't have to fight all the time." Selena nodded slowly, her eyes reflecting the distant stars. "I've never thought about a future," she confessed. "I never thought I would have one. I was always just trying to survive the day, to make it through the next minute. The future was something that belonged to someone else." Erik stepped closer, his heart heavy with empathy for the pain she had carried with her for so long. "It doesn't have to be like that anymore," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "You can have a future, Selena. You can choose what it looks like." There was a long pause before she spoke again. "And what if I don't know how to choose? What if I'm just broken beyond repair?" Erik took another step closer, his presence a silent promise. "Then I'll help you figure it out. You don't have to do it alone. That's what partners do, they help each other." Selena's eyes searched his face, as if she were looking for something he hadn't yet shown. "You really think we can be partners?" she asked, her voice hesitant. Erik smiled softly, the warmth of it reaching his eyes. "I don't think it. I know it. You've been through more than anyone should have to go through, but that doesn't mean you're alone now. We're in this together. Whatever comes next, we face it side by side." Her gaze softened, and for the first time, she met his eyes without hesitation. There was a trust there now, a bond that hadn't existed before. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about something deeper, something that neither of them had anticipated. It was about building something together, not just enduring what had been forced upon them. In the days that followed, their partnership grew. It wasn't just about fixing the ship or surviving another day, it was about building something new. Selena found herself leaning on Erik in ways she hadn't thought possible. She let him in, little by little, allowing him to see her vulnerabilities, her fears, her doubts. In return, Erik allowed himself to be more than just a soldier, more than just the man who had freed her. He became someone who could build a life with her, not for her. They spent long hours together, learning how to work side by side, not just on the ship, but in their growing relationship. They shared everything, moments of quiet, moments of laughter, even moments of frustration. But through it all, they were becoming more than just two people who had survived. They were becoming a team, forged in the fires of war, but now, determined to shape their future on their own terms. One evening, as they worked together in the engine room, Selena finally spoke again, her voice steady but soft. "Erik, I'm starting to understand what you meant. About having a future. About choosing. For the first time, I think I'm starting to believe I deserve it." Erik paused, looking at her, his heart swelling with pride and relief. "You always deserved it, Selena. You just had to remember how to believe in yourself again." She smiled, the softest, most genuine smile he had ever seen. And in that moment, Erik knew that the partnership they had built wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming everything they had lost, and more. It was about building a future, hand in hand, not as victims of war, but as partners in the truest sense of the word. No longer just two people adrift in a cold, empty galaxy, but two souls, bound by choice, ready to face whatever came next. As the days passed, Erik and Selena found themselves becoming more than just survivors of the war. Their connection had grown from mutual respect to something deeper, something that neither of them had anticipated. It was clear now that what they shared wasn't just a bond forged by necessity or by the sheer will to survive. It was the beginning of a new kind of partnership, one built on understanding, trust, and acceptance. It wasn't perfect, and they both knew that healing would take time, but there was a sense of hope in the air between them now. A quiet sense that something new was starting to take shape. As they spent more time together, working side by side, talking late into the night about their pasts, their fears, and their desires, Erik began to realize that his feelings for Selena had grown beyond what he could have imagined. She wasn't just the woman he had freed from captivity anymore. She wasn't just a survivor. She was someone he cared about deeply, someone he could see himself building a future with. For the first time in his life, Erik felt the weight of love settle on him not like a burden, but as a gentle, inevitable truth. Selena, too, had begun to see Erik differently. At first, she had viewed him as a savior, a man who had pulled her from the darkness and into the light. But now, as their connection deepened, she realized that he wasn't just a man who had helped her. He was a man who had chosen to help her, who had chosen to stand by her. The trust between them, so carefully nurtured over time, was the foundation upon which something more profound could be built. The walls she had put up for so long had begun to crumble, and with it, the space for love had opened in her heart. But this love was not about needing someone to save her. It was about finding someone who saw her for who she was, and who respected her enough to allow her to be that person. One evening, as they worked together in the ship's cockpit, repairing some minor malfunctions, Erik stopped, his hand still on the console, and looked at Selena. There was a quiet intensity in his gaze that made Selena pause and look up from the work she was doing. "Selena," Erik began, his voice low and steady. "I've been thinking about something. About what comes next." She tilted her head slightly, a small frown forming on her face. "What do you mean?" "I thought we were fixing the ship." Erik chuckled softly, the sound light in the otherwise quiet room. "We are. But I mean, what happens after all this? After we've healed, after we put the past behind us. Selena's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but there was something else there too, a kind of curiosity, a willingness to listen. I'm not sure what comes next, she admitted, her voice quieter than usual. I've been free for a while now, but I still feel lost sometimes. Erik nodded, understanding more than she realized. I get it, he said. But I think we both started to find something here. Not just on the ship, but with each other. We've been through so much, and now, maybe it's time to build something new. Together. She looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if looking for something he hadn't said. You mean, like a partnership? She asked, her voice a little hesitant. Yes, Erik replied, stepping closer. But more than that. A marriage. Not because we need it, but because we want it. Because, despite everything we've been through, we've found something in each other that makes us stronger, makes us better. We've built this bond, this understanding, and I think it's worth something. I think it's worth committing to. There was a long silence between them. The only sound was the hum of the ship's engines, a soft reminder of the quiet world they had created together in the vastness of space. Finally, Selena spoke, her voice soft but filled with emotion. You want to marry me? After everything. Erik's expression softened, a mixture of affection and seriousness in his gaze. I do. Because what we've built together is more than just survival. It's more than the past. It's about us choosing to face the future, side by side. No more running, no more hiding. Just us, together. Selena swallowed hard, feeling a knot in her throat. She had spent so much time in fear of losing her freedom, of losing herself in someone else's expectations. But Erik wasn't asking her to give up her autonomy. He was asking her to choose him, just as he was choosing her. It was a choice, not a demand, and for the first time, she realized that she could make this choice freely. There was no force, no manipulation. Just love, raw and real. I never thought I'd have a choice like this, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I thought I'd always be stuck, always be controlled. But with you, I feel like I'm more. Like I can be more. Erik reached out, taking her hand gently in his. You are more, Selena. You always were. You just needed someone to help you see it. A tear slipped down Selena's cheek, but it wasn't one of sadness. It was a tear of release, of letting go of everything that had held her back for so long. She squeezed his hand, the simple gesture carrying more weight than any words could. I think I'm ready, she whispered. Erik smiled, his heart swelling in his chest. Then let's do this. Together. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions as they both came to terms with the magnitude of their decision. For Selena, it was about accepting love on her own terms, understanding that she didn't need to lose herself in a relationship to find happiness. And for Erik, it was about choosing to build a life with someone who understood him in ways no one else ever had. They had both been shaped by the wars they had fought, the losses they had endured, but now, in each other, they had found something worth fighting for. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about creating a life together, a future that was not defined by the battles of their past but by the choices they made today. As they prepared for the quiet ceremony that would bind them, not just in law but in heart and spirit, Erik couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settle over him. This was not a decision made in haste, nor was it one born out of necessity. It was a decision that came from a deep, unshakable understanding, a partnership forged in fire, one that had been tested in the harshest of circumstances and had emerged stronger, more resilient. When the time came, they stood together, side by side, facing the future. It wasn't about grand gestures or perfect speeches, it was about their shared commitment to one another. They were not just two broken souls trying to piece themselves together, they were a couple, bound by choice, ready to face whatever came next, together. The decision was made. They had chosen each other, not out of necessity or circumstance, but because they had found something worth fighting for in each other. It wasn't a grand declaration, but a quiet understanding that bound them together. As they stood side by side, ready to face whatever came next, Erik felt an unexpected sense of peace settle over him. For so long, his life had been defined by the chaos of war, the loss of comrades, and the weight of survival. But now, with Selena by his side, he no longer felt the constant pull of his past. They had built something together, a partnership that was not defined by their scars, but by their shared future. As the days turned into weeks, Erik and Selena began to realize that their future wasn't something they had to wait for. It was something they could shape together. There was a new rhythm to their lives now, a rhythm that was not dictated by the demands of war or the burdens of survival. They were living for themselves, building something beyond the battles that had once consumed them. The shift became a symbol of their new beginning. It was no longer a tool of war, but a home, a place where they could build the life they had always dreamed of, one not defined by fear, but by possibility. For the first time in Selena's life, she felt a sense of belonging, a sense that she was no longer just a survivor, but a partner in a world that they could create together. One morning, as Erik worked on a part of the ship's engine, Selena joined him, her silver hair catching the light as she leaned over the panel to get a closer look. Her presence beside him was no longer a fleeting thing, no longer something that felt fragile or uncertain. It was solid, like the partnership they had forged. As they worked together, the silence between them was comfortable, filled with the shared task at hand, but it was also filled with something deeper, trust. "You're getting better at this," Erik said, his voice light but full of admiration as Selena carefully adjusted a wire in the engine. She looked up at him, her face breaking into a small, genuine smile. "I've had a good teacher," she replied, her voice steady but warm. Erik chuckled, shaking his head. "I'm pretty sure I'm not the one teaching you anything. You're the one fixing the engine." Selena's smile softened, but there was a quiet pride in her expression. "Maybe," she said, wiping her hands on a cloth. "But I'm learning how to take ownership of things. Not just the ship, but myself." Erik stopped for a moment, turning to face her fully. The words she spoke, simple as they were, carried more weight than anything he could have expected. Ownership of herself. It wasn't just a physical freedom she was finding, it was an internal one. She was beginning to believe in her own worth, in her ability to shape her destiny, not as a victim of war, but as a woman who could choose who she became. "You've always had the power to choose," Erik said softly, his voice earnest. "You just had to believe it." She met his gaze, the depth of her eyes reflecting something that had been missing before, a sense of purpose. "Maybe I didn't know how," she admitted, her voice tinged with vulnerability. "But now, I think I'm starting to." The quiet understanding that passed between them in that moment felt like another brick being laid in the foundation of their life together. It wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about building. And together, they were starting to construct something that had been out of reach for so long, a life that was no longer dictated by the chaos of the past, but by the choices they made in the present. One evening, as they sat under the stars on the observation deck, the ship sailing smoothly through the vast emptiness of space, Selena spoke again, her voice quiet but filled with determination. "Erik," she began, her gaze fixed on the stars, "I've been thinking." "About what?" Erik asked, his voice light, though he could sense the weight of her words. She turned her head slightly to meet his eyes. "About us. About what we've built. I know it's not perfect. I know we still have a lot of healing to do. But I think I'm ready for whatever comes next. I'm ready to face the future, not as someone who's been broken, but as someone who has the strength to create something new." Erik's heart swelled with pride as he listened to her. He had always known she was strong, but hearing her say it out loud, seeing her own her strength, was something entirely different. They were no longer two wounded souls trying to piece together their broken selves. They were a team, bound by something far more powerful than survival. They were building a future together, one step at a time. "I'm proud of you," Erik said softly, his words full of sincerity. "And I'm proud of us. We're not just surviving anymore. We're living. We're choosing." Selena smiled, the corners of her lips turning up as she leaned back in her chair, gazing at the stars once more. "I never thought I'd be able to say that," she murmured. "But you've shown me that we don't have to be defined by our past. We can choose what we want to become." They sat in silence for a long time, not uncomfortable, but filled with the kind of peace that only comes when two people truly understand each other. The stars outside seemed to shine a little brighter, as if the universe itself was acknowledging the shift that had taken place between them. It was then that Erik realized something important. Freedom wasn't just about escaping the physical chains of the past. It was about choosing to build something new, something worth fighting for. And with Selena by his side, he was no longer fighting alone. The following days were filled with decisions, both big and small. They began to make plans for the future, not just for the ship or their immediate survival, but for their life together. They discussed new territories to explore, new planets to visit, and new goals to pursue, not as individuals, but as a unit, as equals. Selena no longer saw herself as a prisoner of her past, and Erik no longer saw himself as just a soldier in a war that had long since ended. They were building something new, something that belonged entirely to them. One evening, as they stood together in the control room, watching the stars whiz by, Selena turned to Erik with a small smile. "You were right, you know," she said softly. "I didn't think I had the power to choose my own life. But now, I see it. We really can build a future together. And that future is ours to decide." Erik smiled, his heart light with the certainty that had come from sharing this journey with her. "It always was," he replied. And in that moment, as they stood side by side, the future seemed less like a daunting unknown and more like a path that was theirs to walk together, one step at a time, with strength, love, and the freedom to choose. They had finally left the past behind, not as survivors of war, but as two people ready to create something new. Together. As time passed aboard the ship, Erik and Selena's bond grew deeper, rooted in understanding and shared purpose. They had come a long way from the chaos of war, and with each passing day, they found themselves not just surviving, but beginning to build something more meaningful. The scars of their past were still present, lingering beneath the surface, but they were no longer defining their every move. They had begun to see the world not through the lens of their trauma, but through the possibilities of what lay ahead. But with the peace they had carved for themselves came a new, unexpected challenge: purpose. They had both been so consumed by the demands of war. Erik, a soldier whose every decision had been dictated by the need to survive and fight, and Selena, a woman whose life had been a constant battle for freedom and survival, that now, with the threat of war behind them, they had to face the question they had avoided for so long: what now? Erik had spent most of his life fighting battles, some of them chosen, many of them forced upon him. He was a soldier, first and foremost, and his purpose had always been clear: fight for the greater good, win the war, and survive. But now that the war was over, he found himself lost in a strange, unfamiliar silence. For the first time in his life, he wasn't following orders, and the weight of the future felt overwhelming. Without the clear structure of conflict and survival, he realized that he didn't know who he was without the war. He was no longer just a soldier. He was something more. But what? Selena understood the struggle better than Erik could ever realize. She had spent most of her life as a prisoner, a tool of war for the Graian Dominion. She had been shaped by her captivity, her every thought and action dictated by the demands of those who controlled her. Freedom had been a distant dream, one she hadn't dared to hope for. And now that it was within her reach, she found herself asking the same question Erik had been grappling with: what now? She was no longer a slave, but what did it mean to be free? What did she want for herself in this new life? It was in the quiet moments between their shared tasks, those unspoken exchanges as they worked side by side, that they began to realize the path they were on. There was no blueprint for their lives now. There was no mission to complete, no enemy to defeat. There was only the future they would have to build from scratch, together. One evening, as they sat in the galley, preparing food together in a silence that had grown comfortable over time, Erik finally spoke up, breaking the stillness that had settled between them. "Do you ever think about what we're doing here?" he asked, his voice carrying the weight of unspoken thoughts. "I mean, beyond just surviving. I know we've found peace for now, but there's more to life than just this. I feel like I'm just drifting, like I don't have a real purpose anymore." Selena looked up at him, her expression thoughtful. The idea of purpose had been something she had thought about often but had never had the chance to explore until now. "I understand what you mean," she said quietly. "Before, I didn't even have the space to think about purpose. I was just trying to stay alive, trying to make it through the day. But now I can see how lost I feel sometimes. I was never given the chance to dream about a future. It was always about survival. So, what do I do now?" Erik let out a slow breath, his gaze falling to the floor. "I used to think that the only thing that mattered was the next battle. But now I feel like there's something more we could be doing. Something bigger than just wandering from one place to the next. I'm not just a soldier anymore, but I don't know what else I am." Selena placed the knife down on the table and leaned back in her chair, her hands resting on her lap. "We don't have to have all the answers, Erik," she said softly, her voice steady but full of conviction. "We can't expect to have it all figured out overnight. But maybe we can start by deciding what we want. We've survived everything life has thrown at us. Maybe now it's time to start living, to build something new." Her words lingered in the air between them, filling the space with the possibility of change. For the first time in a long while, Erik felt something stir within him: hope. It was a quiet thing, fragile and uncertain, but it was there. Perhaps, for the first time, they didn't have to define themselves by the wars they had fought. Perhaps they could choose what came next. "You're right," Erik said, looking up at her with a new understanding. We've been given this chance. A second chance, I guess. But it's up to us to make something of it, something that isn't tied to the past. We've been given freedom, but freedom is more than just escaping captivity. It's about finding something to live for, something that means something to us. Selena nodded slowly, her mind turning over the possibility. But how do we start? I've never had the chance to even think about what I might want out of life. I've been a prisoner of someone else's plans for so long that I don't know what my own would look like. Erik smiled, a hint of warmth creeping into his eyes. We start by taking it one step at a time. Together. We don't have to figure it all out right away. But we can begin by choosing to be more than just survivors. We can choose to build something that's ours. Something we decide. The weight of his words settled between them like an unspoken agreement. The future wasn't set in stone. It wasn't determined by their past or by the scars they both carried. The future, for the first time, was something they could shape. Together. In the days that followed, they began to explore what this new life could look like. They started with small, deliberate steps. They made plans, nothing grand or far-reaching, but simple goals, to learn new skills, to explore the vast galaxy, to create. Every decision, no matter how small, began to feel like part of something bigger. They didn't know what the end would look like, but they knew one thing for sure: they wouldn't be facing it alone. One evening, as they stood side by side on the observation deck, watching the stars stretch out before them, Selena turned to Erik. "Do you ever wonder what the future holds for us?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Erik looked at her, his heart full. "All the time. But you know what? I'm not afraid anymore. With you, I think we can handle whatever comes next." Selena smiled softly, her hand brushing against his. "I think we can, too." And in that moment, they both realized that their future wasn't just a matter of surviving the past. It was about choosing to create something new, something better. Together, they had a chance to rediscover what it meant to live, to find purpose in a world that no longer demanded they fight. It was a chance for them to define their own destiny, and for the first time, it felt like the future was truly in their hands. After months of rebuilding their lives aboard the ship, Erik and Selena found themselves facing a new, more insidious challenge. The peace they had begun to create for themselves, a fragile but real bond built on shared purpose, was now threatened by something that neither of them had expected: the ghosts of their past. They had both been scarred, but in different ways. The war had left marks on Erik that were visible: his tired eyes, the way his hands would sometimes shake when he tried to hold onto something, and the way he could never fully relax. But Selena, she bore scars that were not just physical, but etched into the very core of her being. Her mind had been the true battlefield, her soul the place where the deepest wounds had festered, invisible to everyone but herself. They had spoken of their pasts in fragments. Erik about the battles he had fought, the comrades he had lost, the heavy weight of being a soldier who had outlived so many. Selena had shared bits and pieces, her words guarded, carefully chosen. She had talked of the captivity, of the years spent under the Graian's control, and the way her very sense of self had been stripped away with every command she had been forced to obey. But neither of them had fully confronted what their pasts had done to them. The memories, the fears, and the trauma lingered just beneath the surface, clouding their present and threatening their future. One evening, as the ship glided silently through the dark void of space, Erik found himself once again lost in his thoughts. He sat in the cockpit, staring out into the endless expanse, feeling the weight of everything that had come before him. For a while, He thought it was just the quiet that weighed him down. The stillness of space had always made him uneasy. But tonight, it felt different. The stillness wasn't just external. It was internal, too. He could hear her footsteps behind him, soft and hesitant. Selena had learned to move through the ship with a kind of quiet grace, but tonight, there was something in her gait that told Erik she was troubled. "Erik." Her voice was small, tentative. He turned to face her, his brow furrowed in concern. "What's on your mind, Selena?" She hesitated, looking down at her hands as if the weight of her thoughts were too much to put into words. "I've been thinking a lot lately. About everything that happened, everything we've been through." She paused, her gaze drifting to the window, where stars flickered like distant memories. "And I realize I'm still not okay. I'm still haunted by things I can't change." Erik's heart tightened as he listened. He had known she was still struggling with the weight of her past, but hearing her admit it out loud made it so much more real. He had his own demons, those moments when the faces of the men he'd killed in battle flashed behind his closed eyelids, or when he woke up, drenched in sweat, from nightmares that felt too real. But this was different. This was about Selena's soul, about the way she had been broken by forces much larger than herself. "Selena," he said gently, standing up and walking toward her. "You're not broken. You're healing. It just takes time." She met his gaze, her eyes filled with a sadness that Erik had never seen before. "But what if I can't heal? What if these memories, these ghosts, will always be with me? What if I'm forever haunted by the things I did, the things they made me do?" The vulnerability in her voice hit him harder than any battle he had ever fought. He could see the battle she was fighting now wasn't just physical, it was a war for her own soul. She was trying to reconcile the person she had been with the person she wanted to become, and it was a war she had been fighting alone for far too long. Erik reached out, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "Selena, I can't pretend to understand everything you've been through. But I know one thing for sure, you are not what they made you. You are not just a product of your past. You're stronger than that." She shook her head slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm walking around with this constant weight inside me, like I can never escape it." "Maybe you never escape it," Erik said softly, his voice laced with the quiet wisdom of someone who had spent too many nights battling his own demons. "But you don't have to face it alone anymore. We can carry it together. You don't have to fight this war by yourself." She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for something, comfort, perhaps, or an assurance that he truly meant what he said. "And what about you, Erik? You've been through your own battles. Are you sure you're ready to help me with mine?" He smiled, a small, reassuring smile, though his own heart was heavy with the weight of his past. "I'm not perfect, Selena. Far from it. But I don't want you to carry this burden alone. I'm here for you, just like you've been here for me. We don't have to be alone in this anymore." The silence between them was thick, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of understanding, full of the recognition that they were both damaged in different ways, but that they didn't have to let that define them. Together, they could face the ghosts of their pasts, not by running from them, but by acknowledging them and choosing to move forward anyway. "I want to be free of it," Selena said, her voice trembling slightly, but her words carrying a quiet strength that Erik had never heard before. "I want to be more than the ghosts that follow me. I want to live again." "You will," Erik said, his voice firm. "We both will." It won't be easy. It won't happen overnight. But we'll face it together. And for the first time in a long while, Selena felt a small flicker of hope. She was no longer alone in her fight, no longer carrying the weight of her past in silence. With Erik beside her, she could start to believe that there was a life beyond the war, beyond the chains, beyond the ghosts that had haunted her for so long. "Thank you," she whispered, the words heavy with meaning. "I don't know if I could do this without you." Erik's grip tightened on her shoulder, and he nodded. "You don't have to." In that moment, they both understood something important, that the ghosts of their pasts would always be there. But they didn't have to let them define who they were or who they would become. Together, they would face the memories, the pain, and the scars, not as victims, but as survivors who had chosen to heal. After the quiet moments of confronting their pasts together, Erik and Selena began to understand something vital about themselves and each other. It wasn't just the healing they had been focused on, it was about embracing vulnerability. It had always been so easy for both of them to hide behind the walls they had built, the armor of survival, and the pain that held them in check. But now, with the weight of the past being acknowledged, they realized that to truly move forward, to build a future, they would have to let go of the fear of being vulnerable with each other. For Erik, vulnerability had always been a foreign concept. He had spent so many years in the rigid structure of war, where emotions were weakness, and the mission was all that mattered. His heart had been hardened by loss and survival, and he had learned to bury everything else. The idea of being open, of exposing his deepest fears and regrets, seemed almost dangerous to him. But in Selena, he saw something that made him question everything he had once believed about strength. She wasn't afraid to confront her past, to show her pain, and in doing so, she had started to release the chains that bound her. Selena, too, had always struggled with vulnerability. In her years of captivity under the Graian, she had learned that showing any sign of weakness meant suffering. She had been taught to silence her emotions, to bury her identity in the face of oppression. For her, vulnerability wasn't just uncomfortable, it had been dangerous. But in Erik's presence, something was shifting. She had begun to understand that she didn't have to hide behind her past anymore. She could choose to be vulnerable, not as a weakness, but as a strength, a way to connect, to rebuild, and to finally trust someone enough to share her deepest, truest self. One evening, after a long day of working together on the ship, Selena found herself sitting by the window, gazing out into the vastness of space. The quiet hum of the engines filled the background, but it was the silence between them that felt heavy now. They had come a long way since the first time they'd met, but there was still something unspoken, a piece of themselves they hadn't fully shared with one another. Erik walked into the room and saw her there, her face lit by the soft glow of distant stars. He hesitated, unsure of how to approach her, unsure of whether to disturb the quiet peace they had created or to let her be. "Selena," Erik said, his voice gentle but firm. "Can we talk?" She turned slowly, her gaze meeting his with a mixture of weariness and curiosity. "What's on your mind?" she asked, her voice soft but open. Erik walked toward her, his expression serious but kind. He wasn't sure where to begin, but he knew they needed to have this conversation. "I've been thinking," he began, sitting down next to her, "about everything we've been through, and about what comes next for us." Selena's eyes flickered with understanding. "You mean, what we're building together?" "Yeah," Erik replied, his voice quieter now. "But more than that. I've been thinking about how we've changed. How we've come so far already, but how there's still something between us. I feel like we've been holding back, not fully letting each other in. And maybe that's what we need to do now. Embrace it. Embrace the vulnerability of trusting each other fully." Selena paused, her gaze drifting back to the stars outside the window. She hadn't expected this conversation, but there was a warmth in Erik's words that made her realize he was right. They had come so far, and yet, there was still this invisible barrier between them. They had shared so much, fears, hopes, even dreams, but there was still something deeper that neither of them had dared to express. "You're right," Selena finally said, her voice low but steady. "I've been afraid to let go. Afraid of letting myself be seen fully. I've spent so long hiding, even from you, even though I know you've been trying to help me. But there's still a part of me that feels like I'm not whole. Like I'm not enough." Erik reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle yet reassuring. "You are enough, Selena. You always have been. I just want you to know that you don't have to hide from me. You don't have to carry this alone anymore." Her eyes met his, a vulnerability in her gaze that she hadn't allowed herself to show before. "I don't know how to stop hiding," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to trust that this won't end, like everything else." Erik's heart ached as he listened. He understood her fear, her hesitation. He had his own ghosts to face, his own memories that he hadn't fully confronted. But in this moment, with Selena beside him, he knew that if they were going to move forward, they had to face those fears together. "Trust isn't something that happens overnight," Erik said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's a choice we make every day. And I'm choosing to trust you. I'm choosing to trust us." For a long moment, they sat there in silence, the weight of their words settling between them. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable, but it was heavy with the understanding that this was a pivotal moment for both of them. It was the moment when they would finally let go of the barriers that had kept them isolated and start embracing the vulnerability that had the power to bring them closer. Finally, Selena spoke, her voice tinged with both uncertainty and hope. "I think I'm ready," she said softly. "I'm ready to stop hiding. I'm ready to trust, truly trust." Erik smiled, a sense of relief washing over him. "Then we'll take it one step at a time. Together. We'll face everything that comes, whatever it is. But we'll face it as a team. As equals." Selena nodded, her heart feeling lighter than it had in months. The weight of the past was still there, still lingering in the background, but in this moment, it felt like it was being lifted, just a little. She had allowed herself to be vulnerable with Erik in a way she never had before, and in doing so, she had taken the first step toward truly healing. They sat together in the quiet, the soft hum of the ship their only company, but it was no longer a silence filled with the weight of their pasts. It was a silence full of promise, full of the understanding that vulnerability was not a weakness, it was the strength that would allow them to build a future together. "Thank you," Selena whispered, her voice full of emotion. "For being patient with me. For helping me see that I don't have to hide anymore." Erik's hand found hers, squeezing it gently. "You don't have to thank me, Selena. We're in this together. Always." And for the first time, Selena truly believed it. She was no longer just surviving. She was living. And with Erik beside her, she was ready to face whatever came next, not as someone hiding from the world, but as someone ready to embrace it. As Erik and Selena sat side by side, staring out at the endless stretch of stars, they began to understand something about the nature of their journey. It wasn't just about the past anymore, The war, the chains, the trauma. They had begun to carve out something for themselves, something new. And as they did so, the universe that had once seemed so cold and indifferent now felt like something they could claim for themselves. For the first time, it didn't feel like they were lost in the vastness of space. They felt like they were finally finding their place in it, not just surviving, but living. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was rich with the unspoken understanding that they were both experiencing a shift in how they viewed themselves, their pasts, and their future. For so long, both of them had felt like they were at the mercy of forces beyond their control. The war had taught them that survival was about fighting for every breath, every step forward. But now, as they moved forward together, they realized that living was about something else entirely. "Do you ever wonder what we're really doing out here?" Selena asked, her voice soft, but filled with curiosity. She didn't look at Erik as she spoke, but her words hung between them, something deep and genuine wanting to be heard. "I mean, we fought so hard to survive, to escape the past, but now I don't know if I can still see what it's all for." Erik turned his gaze from the stars to her, his eyes thoughtful. He knew that there were still parts of Selena that hadn't fully embraced the freedom she had fought so hard for. He saw it in her eyes sometimes, the way she still carried the weight of her past, the way she wondered if she could truly be more than a survivor. "I think we're finding our place," Erik said after a long pause, his voice quiet but sure. "It's not about fighting or surviving anymore. We don't need to keep running, Selena. For the first time, we're standing still. We're building something from the ground up. Together." Selena turned to him, her eyes searching his face for the sincerity she always found there. "But what are we building? I don't want to just exist. I don't want to be a relic of the past, always running from it, hiding from it." "I get that," Erik replied, his tone softening. "But that's the thing. We don't have to hide from it anymore. We've been given a chance to choose what comes next. We can build a future that's ours. Not one shaped by what we've been through, but one shaped by what we choose." Selena's heart seemed to swell with the weight of his words. She had spent so long hiding, so long waiting for something to tell her what her life should be. Now, as Erik spoke, it became clear that her future wasn't something she had to hope for. It was something she could create. And for the first time, she felt a flicker of hope, a small, fragile thing, but there nonetheless. "You're right," Selena whispered, her voice more confident than it had ever been. "We've been so focused on just surviving, but maybe it's time to stop surviving and start living. Maybe we need to make our own way, in our own time, with no one else telling us what to do." Erik smiled, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. "Exactly. This is our chance. We've been through hell, Selena. But we're still standing. And now, we get to decide what happens next. We get to find out who we really are, not who we were told we should be." The ship continued to hum beneath them, the steady rhythm of life that they had built together now a constant, familiar presence. It was no longer just a ship. It was their home, a place where they could feel safe, where they could begin to heal, and where they could build the life they had always dreamed of, but never thought possible. "Do you think we'll ever really be able to leave the past behind?" Selena asked, her voice a little more vulnerable now. "I mean, no matter how hard we try, those memories, those scars, are still there. Will we ever truly be free of them?" Erik thought for a moment before responding. "Maybe we'll never truly forget. But that doesn't mean we can't create something new. We don't have to be defined by our scars. We can be defined by what we choose to do now, by how we choose to live. Selena nodded, her gaze returning to the stars. You know, she said, a quiet smile tugging at her lips, I think I'm starting to believe that. Maybe we do have the power to choose. Maybe it's not about escaping the past, but about finding our place in the future. The thought settled between them, heavy and real, and for the first time, they both felt the weight of it with a quiet, overwhelming sense of peace. They had spent so long running, so long defined by the things that had happened to them. But now, they had something else, the freedom to decide who they would become. The stars above them seemed to glow brighter, as though in response to the quiet shift in their hearts. The universe, once so vast and uncertain, now felt like a place full of possibility, their possibility. It was no longer just a cold expanse stretching out beyond them. It was a canvas. And they were ready to paint it? Erik turned toward Selena, his eyes reflecting the same sense of hope that had begun to burn in her chest. Do you ever think about where we'll go next? What's out there? Selena smiled softly, a look of quiet wonder on her face. I don't know. But I think I'm ready to find out. Wherever we go, whatever we do, we'll do it together. Erik nodded, feeling a sense of certainty that he hadn't felt in years. Together, he repeated. And for the first time, I'm not afraid of what comes next. Not as long as we're walking it side by side. With that, they sat in comfortable silence, the weight of their pasts no longer burdening them but propelling them forward. The future was unknown, but it was theirs to discover. And for the first time, that felt like enough. The universe was vast, but they didn't need to understand it all. All they needed was each other, and together, they could face whatever came next.